Hey, it's Huck. And I went to Harvard. Actually, I did. I went to Harvard last week for just a day. I have been, like so many others, been cooped up in this house for about, 16, 18 months now, and afraid to go out and do anything. Finally, now with the vaccines, things are opening up a little bit more, and I feel a little bit more confident being able to do more. I still wear my mask when in public, particularly anytime I find myself indoors in public. But at any rate, my friend Dustin and I decided that it was time to knock something off our bucket list. I am a huge Robert Kennedy fan, and have been really from almost as long as I can remember. And I thought, I have been fortunate enough to travel around this country a bit. I've been to Texas, I've been to California, I've been to Arizona, I've been to the Grand Canyon, I've been to Yellowstone National Park. All of the places that I've mentioned I did on one trip about 35 years ago. It was a remarkable trip. We saw a lot. But one of the places I've not been has been to New England. I've just never been there. And considering that, of all the people outside of my family and closest friends who've had a big positive impact on my life, aside from maybe a few teachers and somebody who's been remarkably generous in helping me these last several years, I would have to say maybe one of the people that had the greatest moral impact on me has been Robert Kennedy. I was too young to really understand or know much about John F. Kennedy, but I was home sick from school. I was 7 years old that day in November 1963 when President Kennedy was shot. And I remember that day, pretty distinctly. I was sitting in this room, in fact, as a child, watching our black and white RCA television. I was home from school that day, sick, and my mom was down in the basement, I assume doing the laundry, when I was watching. There was an afternoon movie that came on the local CBS affiliate here at that time in the afternoons, and so I was watching whatever that afternoon movie was when the broadcast was interrupted with a news bulletin that indeed the president had been shot. And I remember calling down to my mom down in the basement to tell her that she should come and see what's on TV. And when I told her, what the bulletin had said, she did. She came upstairs, and I don't remember much more about that particular day. I do remember several days later coming home from school and coming in through the door, and in the few days that had transpired from the day that President Kennedy was shot and killed until the day of his funeral and procession in Washington, D.C., my mom must have been just like a worker bee, just had to stay busy, to keep her mind occupied or something. And so in those few days, she had changed and I still remember this for some reason. I remember sitting in this room watching that news bulletin, and then a little bit later, Walter Cronkite had come on, and we watched all of that, I guess. And a few days later, when the funeral occurred, the TV had been moved into our, what really was a bedroom later, but it was a den at that time. And there was an old sofa in there and an old chair, stuffed chair, and she put the TV in the corner of this little den. And so I came home from school, got off the bus, came in the house, and I remember so distinctly coming into the den, and my mom was sitting there and she was watching the funeral procession. You know, where little John gave his salute to the casket rolling down the street on the caisson. And that funeral, that made a big impression on me. I do not recall ever seeing my mom crying before that. She cried all through that, and I remember we watched all of it. We watched the ceremony at Arlington, the lighting of the eternal torch. And like I said, I was not old enough to appreciate really all of that, but I was old enough to understand what an impact this was having on my mom. And so in the few years that followed, I became really interested in Robert Kennedy. And just under a year later, for instance, I remember I really watched for the first time the Democratic National Convention when they were nominating Lyndon Baines Johnson, to run, to retain his now inherited presidency as a Democratic nominee. And I remember on the last day of that convention, Robert Kennedy got up to speak and give a short little tribute speech to his brother in honor of his brother, and I know now, I probably wasn't as aware then, but I later became aware that that Robert Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson were not friends by any stretch of the imagination, and probably the last thing Lyndon Baines Johnson really wanted was was Kennedy to be in the picture there. But then again, how can he avoid it? And so they, at any rate, I remember when Robert got up to speak, the whole convention rose to its feet. And they gave him, I believe, the longest standing ovation, in convention history. I believe it lasted 22 minutes. And you could tell about halfway through that, or maybe even sooner, that it really it affected Robert Kennedy. And I don't think I'll ever forget that image of him standing there with tears in his eyes as he was trying to begin his speech with the words, "Mr. Speaker." And I think that kind of cemented for me that this was a man I wanted to know more about. By the time 1968 rolled around, and I would have been 11 years old, going on 12, I had probably read everything I could get my hands on the Kennedys. My mom was a big contributor to that because she amassed a virtual library of all kinds of books about John F. Kennedy. Included, I think there were some hardcover picture books called 4 Days, and I don't know, there were a number of them that we still have. I still have here in the house. If there was I remember getting the book Making of the President, 1960. I remember reading well, the final book that I bought was To Seek a Newer World, that came out during the Robert Kennedy campaign. And of course that campaign ended with him winning the California primary on June 5th, 1968. And as he gave his victory speech, and I was up that evening, I was watching it again here in this room. I stayed up late that night. It was June 5th, 1968. June 5th is my birthday, and that was my 12th birthday. And as he said the words, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there, speaking of the 1968 Democratic Convention that was going to be held in a few months' time in Chicago, he was rerouted to go back to his room through, I guess, the kitchen. I still, it still haunts me that one of the people that was with him that evening, waiting for him up in his room, who had watched the election returns with him until he finally came down and made his victory speech, was his son, one of 10 children that he had at the time. There was 11th on the way that he didn't live to see. But with him up in his hotel room and waiting for him after the speech was his son David. And David wouldn't see his father. His father was shot in the kitchen at point blank range by an assailant, Sirhan Bishara Sirhan. And there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about whether Sirhan acted alone or not, and this isn't a video about any of that. I know Robert Kennedy died hours later. It was actually June 6th when he died in the hospital of his wound. And I probably read everything I could get my hands on in the aftermath of that regarding the Kennedys and in particular Robert. And there were literally, dozens of books, and they still come out. Just a couple of years ago, Chris Matthews of MSNBC wrote a book, so I had to buy it. But at any rate, like I say, it's hard to express really, after all these years, the sheer impact that this man's legacy has kind of had on me and my political opinions, and so this was an opportunity to go to where this man was raised. I have always wanted to see Hyannisport, and I've always wanted to, go to Boston, and I'd never done it. And so last week, Monday of last week, Dustin and I got in my car, and this was by no means an easy decision, and I could not have done this, I want to say, without not just the help that I've continued to receive, because that was enormous. Like I say, I've managed to save up a little bit of money, and with Dustin's help, of course, physically, I could not have probably done this. We brought my my mobility scooter, and so he was not just a financial help, because we split the cost pretty much down the middle, but just the logistics of getting everything out of the car and up to the room and getting the scooter in and out of the car. And not only that, I had to take an oxygen concentrator that I'm with an oxygen supplier now. They've kind of changed on me here in the last year, and it's been a little over 2 years since the last time I had gone anywhere at all. And usually in the past, when I've gone on a trip somewhere, the oxygen supplier will arrange with an oxygen supplier in the city that I'm going to be to arrange to have oxygen supplied in the hotel room or whatever. Well, this wasn't going to be one of those times. But what the oxygen supplier did do was they gave me a kind of a small, not portable, but a smaller Whisper Quiet oxygen concentrator, floor model. But the thing only weighed about 30 pounds, and it was smaller and much, much quieter than mine. So we put it in the back seat and strapped it in, like a little toddler, and we took it with us, which was good because we spent 3 nights in just outside of Boston in a place called Chelsea, which was perfect because it was free parking. We were able to park right next to the door to get in and out of the hotel, and it was really only like a 10-minute drive from our hotel to downtown Boston. We took the first 3 days to explore, a little bit of, we walked the Freedom Trail, which is kind of a brick path that takes you through old historic Boston. There are, I think, 16 Revolution era sites that are still existing in downtown Boston, and this brick path, you follow this brick path from Boston Commons, this big park downtown, and it winds its way around these different 16 sites. And they include places like old Massachusetts State House and Paul Revere's original house. There's the Old North Church, the Old South Meeting House, Faneuil Hall, which was where Sam Adams plotted and launched the Boston Tea Party. It's kind of a big meeting house, place for debates, I guess, at that time. And one of the more fascinating places also was, they marked the spot of the Boston Massacre in front of a building that's kind of been repurposed several times. There's a big statue of Benjamin Franklin and a statue of Josiah Quincy standing outside another famous building. And then, of course, there's the Granary Burial Grounds, where, among other people, John Hancock, Paul Revere, and each of the victims of the Boston Massacre are all buried, among many others. And, it's fascinating. Living here in Ohio as I do, we don't see any graves that date back to 1830s or I'm sorry, 1630s or 1660s or 1680s, like several of the graves that we saw in Massachusetts. including the granary. Also buried there were the parents of Benjamin Franklin, interestingly. So anyway, this was, I love history, and it was fascinating to go through there. We ended up going back on our last day on this trip. We were exploring, the last 2 days we were exploring not Boston, but Cape Cod, which is about an hour and a half away. And we couldn't go to Martha's Vineyard, which I kind of really had hoped to do. One, it was too expensive to do that. But two, it was also, they were having problems with parking, and you had to park like 4 miles away from the ferries that take you out there, and there were all kinds of issues that were not going to make it feasible for us to do it. And so we didn't go out there. I wanted to go out there in part because not only was it well, one of my favorite movies, Jaws, was filmed in between Edgartown and Oak Bluffs. And I once met one of the kids that, he was a local kid. When they filmed Jaws, a lot of the extras and even a few of the minor roles were filled by locals on Martha's Vineyard. One of those roles was Chief Brody's oldest son, Michael. Michael Brody was played by a kid from Oak Bluffs, Martha's Vineyard, whose name was Chris Ribello. And several years, about a year and a half after, well, maybe a year after that was filmed, I guess, the tourist situation on Martha's Vineyard, in the aftermath of that movie, was something intense. And as I understand it, Ribello's family decided to get the hell out of Dodge because they were being besieged by tourists. And so they went on a, I guess like a cross-country trip. And I met them camping, of all places, here in Ohio. And apparently they were on their way to, I don't know, some friend or relative, I think, that happened to live in, can't remember the name of the town now, but somewhere near Columbus, Ohio. And at any rate, I ran into Chris Ribello. He had observed me. I was probably, this would have been 1975, I think, 76. So he was probably about 12 or 13, and I was probably in my, probably about 19. And I had a habit when I was a kid, when I was younger, that I would do this running, flipping, like 1.5 dive into shallow water would be my entrance at the beach. I was kind of a show-off. At any rate, so this kid come up to me and asked me to teach him how to do that. And of course, I didn't know who the kid was. And I did. I kind of showed him how to do it. Or at least I tried to show him how it was done. And after a while, he came back up to me on the beach, and he told me, this was kind of a secret. He wasn't supposed to tell anybody, but, I'm in the movie Jaws, and I didn't believe him. I had later found out that he was telling me the truth. And unfortunately, as it turns out, Chris isn't alive any longer. He was like 30, I want to say 37 years old, and he died of a heart attack. He was, I think, a head coach or assistant coach for his high school football team there in Oak Bluffs. At any rate, I had met him and I'd met his parents and on that camping trip. There's a couple of other people on Oak Bluffs that have lived there all their lives that were in the movie. One of which was the kid that played the Alex Kittner boy who was the second person to die in the movie. He was the one on the raft at the beach. And he later opened up a restaurant, I think in Edgartown, where he served a sandwich called the Alex Kittner Special or something. At any rate, my understanding is I think he sold that restaurant, I don't know, about 10 years ago. So at any rate, I really had a desire to go to Cape Cod, but we didn't. And that's really my only regret of the trip. The trip didn't cost as much money as I thought it would. We were pretty frugal. I did buy a Harvard mug, and the last day that we were there, we went back to Boston because I stopped in Hyannis. We stopped in at a souvenir shop, and I bought I bought a sweatshirt, and it was one of these discount sweatshirt shops where they'll make the shirt. You pick out what you want, and they make it for you. And there was a guy who was really nice, and his uncle who worked there, and he spent a good deal of time, talking with us, and and he was asking us what we enjoyed about the trip, and what were our highlights. And when I told him, the Freedom Trail in Boston, he asked us if we had stayed at, or if we had visited the Bell in Hand, and I didn't know what that was. And here it's the country's oldest tavern. The Bell in Hand still exists, or at least it's been added onto. It's now several stories big, but the original first floor of this tavern is still there. And apparently it was founded in 1795 by Boston's longtime but then retired Town Crier, hence the name, Bell in Hand. For 50 years he had given the news on everything from the start of the Revolution to the signing of the Declaration of Independence, to the establishment of Articles of Confederation, and the U.S. Constitution, and all of that. And so among the personages who have been said to have drank their brewskis there were none other than George Washington, Sam Adams, John Adams, Paul Revere, you name it. They all have been there. It had a reputation for, apparently he established this, I think his name was Wilson, the guy that had actually founded the tavern, the Town Crier, and it was going to be a place that served ale and not, hard liquor like rum and gin, like the other taverns in town. And so we went there. It took us a while to find it, but it was actually right down the road from Faneuil Hall. If you follow, I don't know if that's Cambridge Street or Union Street, but if you follow it straight, you can't miss it. And so we got ourselves a table. My friend Dustin got some chicken tenders along with his brewski, and I had a beer. Neither one of us finished the beer, but at least we had some. So that was our trip to Boston. We got back Saturday, so we spent, we actually left Boston on Friday, and then we, rather than drive, it took us forever to get out of Boston. So rather than drive, like 10 or 11 hours all the way home, we got, back as far as like into Pennsylvania, somewhere near, short of Scranton, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. We spent the night and got home mid-afternoon Saturday. So that was my big trip, and like I said, I didn't go into a lot of debt. I've got a few bills that are going to be coming due here for that this month, and or probably get these bills in July, and we'll pay that off, and so I can say I did that. One of the highlights of the trip, however, was when we got to Hyannisport. They have a JFK museum. I was kind of surprised that nowhere in Boston and nowhere on Cape Cod, including in Hyannis, none of the souvenir shops had anything anything Kennedy related anywhere. And so we went into the museum, which was not a big building at all, but when we went in there, they had 3 exhibits, and we went into the souvenir shop. I got this. It was the only thing I found with Robert Kennedy on it. If you can see that. That's an image I kind of remember. Obviously, Robert Kennedy was immensely popular with the disenchanted in this country, and particularly with with blacks and other minorities. And one of the 3 exhibits at the JFK Museum was called Ripple of Hope. And it was about Robert Kennedy's trip to South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa in 1966, really at the height of their apartheid in that country. And he had been invited by the student Congress of the University of South Africa, by the student body, had invited him to speak on what they call Reaffirmation Day. And Reaffirmation Day was kind of a a call for the end of racism in the country, and an end to the apartheid policy. And so I know when Robert Kennedy was considering this invitation that he received to speak there, he had a lot to consider, because he was running. This is now 2 years after leaving the White House and his brother's death just 3 years before. And he was running for the U.S. Senate in the state of New York. And he was afraid it would be a distraction from the campaign. And at any rate, he decided in the end to go to do it. And when he arrived there, he met with some students, and his speechwriter had given him a draft of the speech he was going to give for this Reaffirmation Day. And he let a couple of the delegates from the students' panel that had come to see him see the draft, and they didn't like it. They thought it was white man's take on the situation, and didn't really address the more serious the nature of the problem. And so with their help, it was rewritten, and by all accounts, and I know this from all of my reading and and long fascination with Robert Kennedy, the speech he gave the next day at the University of Johannesburg, where, by the way, the Prime Minister of South Africa and no representatives from the South African government attended. It is considered by many the greatest speech Robert Kennedy ever gave. And I remember, several portions of that speech, had always kind of stayed with me. In the speech, Kennedy addresses what he calls the 4 dangers that obstruct civil rights, equality, and justice. One of those dangers is the idea that it's futile. The belief that there's nothing that one man or one woman can do to, against the enormous array of the world's ills. In his own words, he said, it is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice. He sends forth a tiny ripple of hope from a million different centers of energy and daring. These ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest wall of oppression and resistance. The second danger that he mentions is expediency. And somehow there's a more immediate necessity. The third danger he cited was timidity, something that he cited as the lack of moral courage. And finally, fourth and final danger was comfort. And as he put it, like it or not, we live in interesting times. There are times of danger and uncertainty, he said, but they are also the most creative of any time in the history of mankind. And everyone here will ultimately be judged and ultimately judge himself in the effort he has contributed to building a new world, a new society, and the extent to which his ideals and goals have shaped that effort. And so that was the essence of his Ripple of Hope speech. And I think it speaks it speaks to exactly the belief that I think he instilled in me, and largely I think through my mom, that it had such an impact on me from a very early age, and I don't think it ever left me. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around, frankly, but I do know that that I ask myself all the time whether or not whether or not I have served my purpose in this life. I've lived here now 65 years on this earth, and I don't have any children. I don't have any family to leave anything to. And one of the questions I think that has always plagued mankind is what is our purpose here on earth? And I think Robert Kennedy, in that speech, and in this little plaque that I showed you, the purpose of life is to contribute in some way to making things better. And that was what his Ripple of Hope speech was all about. Was that if you're not working actively to make life just a little bit better for others, then you're probably not doing your part. And so this trip has been, ironically, a reaffirmation for me that in what time I do have left, I'm going to make an effort to do my part, as meager as that may be, to move forward, to move us forward. And right now, with what's going on in Washington, I can think of no other area that probably could best be addressed toward that end than to to contact my representatives and urge others to do the same, to reform the filibuster rule so that Democrats on the slim margin that they enjoy can push through this Voting Rights Act. The danger to our democracy and the danger to voting rights in particular is absolutely under attack right now, like it's never been before. And so I urge all of you, if you take anything from this insanely long video at all, please contact your congressman, contact both of your senators, Republican or Democrat makes no difference, and tell them that the Voting Rights Act that is sitting, in the Senate and that the Republicans in a 50-vote rejection basically said we're not even going to debate this. This needs to be passed, and we each need to do our part to make it clearer to our representatives that anything less is unacceptable. Anyway, that's what I've been up to. I'm sorry that it has been, a couple months now since I posted a video. I hope to post a little bit more regularly now. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you again real soon.